Good afternoon. My name is Neil Malvone, Executive Vice President at Collegiate Sports Management Group. Welcome to our Sports Summit Series, Episode 5, Sponsorship, Valuation, and Analytics. Collegiate Sports Management Group's asset audit and valuation services provide benchmarking for how many impressions school and conference-controlled assets currently generate, each asset's specific value, what potential assets could be added, and to increase revenues, as well as the how, what, when, why, as to enhancing marketing assets. Given the many questions left unanswered as we move forward through this pandemic, we brought this panel together to shed some light on best practices in monetizing athletics assets during these uncertain times. This includes market analysis and multimedia rights, which guide negotiations and renegotiations, digital and social assets development, geo targeting for potential local sponsors, and a thorough review of all on-site athletic facilities and assets. The panel will be moderated by our CEO and co-founder, Ray Katz, and our panelists include David Headland, Chairperson of the Division of Sports Management at St. John's University. Professor Headland was recently named to this position due to his extended tenure at St. John's and his wealth of academic and industry knowledge regarding analytics. Professor Hedlund has provided his expertise on many panel discussions on sport analytics and market research. His research has been used by industry leaders in developing analytics and valuation strategies. Welcome, David, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Thanks, Neil. Happy to be here.
Our next panel is Patricia Easley, Sivells, Director of Corporate Partnerships at the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. Patricia plays a key role in the MEAC success as she brings perspective and knowledge from the HBCU community. Since joining the MEAC, Patricia has greatly increased the MEAC's visibility with corporate partners, with the conference now proudly boasting over 20 corporate partnerships for the 2020-21 academic year. Patricia also serves as the coordinator of the Read with MEAC Community Service Initiative. Patricia, thank you for your time today in joining our panel. Next panelist is Blake Lawrence, founder and chief operating officer at Open Doors. Blake founded Open Doors, an athlete marketing platform which helps athletes share and monetize content on social networks. Blake has gained his extensive knowledge and valuation of social media assets throughout his distinguished career. Blake's experience also includes his work at Design Intelligence, where he provided marketing research analytics to brands such as Kellogg's, Red Bull, Jim Beam, Lipton, and Axe. Blake, thank you for taking time today.
Happy to be here.
Next, we have Matthew Yazky, head of Nielsen Esports. Yazky, Matthew has served many roles at Nielsen and now brings his expertise to the esports side of the business. In his current role, Matthew heads up commercial sales and client service for Nielsen Esports to guide right holders and brand sponsors in the esports ecosystem. He created the Nielsen Esports Advisory Board, an industry group comprising top game publishers, event operators, broadcasters, media companies, sport organizations, and brands. Matthew, thank you for taking your time and being with us today.
Happy to be here.
And last but not least, Brett Steger, partner at Strop Insights. Brett has been a key member of the Strop team for almost 2 years. He develops strategic plans that drive short and long-term value for their clients, while also managing all marketing and new business development. Brett works to generate new business and strategic agency partnerships with a focus on the analytics necessary to secure client success. Brett received his MBA in marketing from the University of Texas. Brett, welcome to our panel.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Our moderator is our CEO and co-founder, Raymond Katz. Ray has over 25 years of experience in sport business, media, and marketing, having negotiated deals for multiple blue chip clients across the college sports ecosystem. He has evaluated, packaged, measured, and sold sponsorships and media throughout his 25-year career. Ray has also found time through all of that to provide his knowledge and expertise to college students at the master's level, where he has been teaching sport business and analytics for over 25 years. And with that, I turn the panel over to our CEO, Raymond Katz.
Thank you, Neil. It's a privilege to be a COO of this great company in times like this where schools, brands need solutions, they need answers, they need help. And with the help of this fantastic, distinguished panel, we're going to hopefully provide some great insights today. So we're going to start with some of the challenges and then dig in a little bit into the solutions. And of course, for more detail, our team at CSMG can always be reached, and then our panelists as well through us. So the problem is basically right now, the value of sponsorships is changing quite dramatically, both because in the long term, fan consumption patterns have been changing. And now in the short term with this pandemic, we've seen cancellations of events. We're seeing cancellations of fall season for many of our conference partners and school partners. And moving forward, there's likely to be some decreased attendance and then perhaps more viewership. How does all that translate to measurement? How does that all translate to what's going to be fair in the marketplace for renegotiations? And in fact, what is the implication on business models? As big data becomes more available with artificial intelligence and other tools, the ability of professionals, however, to have quantitative skills as well as critical thinking skills is not necessarily increasing along with all that. So in our industry, as I indicated, many sponsorship assets were not delivered, and this created challenges where brands said, we need make goods, we need money back, we need our platform to be extended out another year for either minimal or no costs. In the case of the MEAC conference, working with Patricia Sivells, our great partner there, valuations have helped us retain sponsorships and increase current sponsorships by quantifying incremental assets. Patricia, perhaps you can weigh in on the value of valuation analytics to date in terms of stabilizing and actually improving the ecosystem as it relates to the MEAC.
All right, I think I'm finally unmuted.
You're unmuted.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And in regards to the valuations, it's been very, very helpful with the MEAC because our conference ended early. We did have some partners that really wanted to understand what the make good would look like. And so by doing valuations and trying to put together packages that were of interest to those partners, depending on their message, we were able to do so with our Geico partner, as well as increase the current, working on increasing the current sponsorship of that partner. Also with Cricket Wireless was one of our new companies that we started doing business with, and we were able to add them to our upcoming football media day, which is going to be virtual on July the 31st. So the valuation has really played a really big part in figuring out of the monies that were provided to our conference, how much of that we utilized for the tournament and how much of it we needed to make up for.
Thank you so much. Blake, you have some exceptional experience with regards to valuation, social media, and otherwise. You've worked with some great blue chip brands. Perhaps you can weigh in on, you see the importance has always been there. Is it changing? Is it increasing? Is it more important when you get outside of sort of blue chip properties and blue chip media?
Yeah, certainly right now there's a search in the market for assets. You talk about the make good side of this in terms of once the games stop, what other places can you turn to within a property? And thank goodness many of the schools across the country have been investing heavily into social and digital media assets, which are on, and consumption of content on social media channels has increased during the pandemic and the lockdowns and whatnot. I think about a couple examples of some of the, I'll go to my alma mater, right? My alma mater at Nebraska. And I know that the folks over there created a Madden tournament that they were able to find sponsorship from. And this trickles into the esports side. So Matt, I'm interested on your side, but found sponsorship from Mountain Dew, right? To sponsor a Madden tournament hosted on Twitch, played by prestigious alumni of Nebraska. Then you see Cox Communication doing a surprise phone call from Heisman Trophy winner Eric Crouch with a super fan. So you're maybe looking outside of your traditional assets and looking more online where the eyeballs are at, and then able to deliver not just a unique asset and activation, but also the data behind that, right? In terms of the 100,000 people that impressions generated by one post from Eric Crouch talking about his call via Cox Communication with a super fan, or the tens of thousands of video views on the Madden tournament driven by, to support Mountain Dew. So all of those things kind of lean you towards social and digital to find new assets, but also the benefit of these online assets is that they're highly tangible, very measurable. So those are things that we're seeing across the country. Some specific examples within Nebraska.
Thank you. That's some terrific insight. David, is all of this taught at St. John's? Is it more prevalent? Are students demanding it, or are they afraid of numbers?
Well, let's start with the are they afraid of numbers? Unfortunately, from my perspective, I think much of the younger generation, they've gone through all of this standardized testing from when they're young children through high school, and a lot of this is kind of created an aversion to math and statistics. And one of the things that we've talked about in recent years is how fantasy sports and sports data, that having this accessible to students and people in general, have kind of turned the corner a little bit, that people are, I think, more interested. And so as a result, St. John's and I think many other universities, that they've created interdisciplinary partnerships amongst areas within the university, whether it's mathematics and statistics and computer science and sport management, to offer some of these classes. Here at St. John's, there are 3 areas: our business school, our sport management, and the math department. We all offer analytics courses focused on sports analytics. We also have an interdisciplinary seminar that we run with our students. And so by giving students kind of hands-on experience with real live data, this has, again, kind of helped us to turn that corner a little bit. And people are saying, okay, I like sports. Maybe I don't like math and numbers and statistics so much, but if you teach me how to do it, I'm willing to learn because it's something I'm interested in. So yeah, I actually think there's really a bright future, but it's going to have to be something that's interdisciplinary, because in sports, many times we're training people in sports and sports business and sports marketing. And so there are other areas for where other things may be better taught.
No, absolutely. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And now let's finish up with our 2 sort of professional researchers, if you will. Let's start, Matt, with the obvious. Since COVID, what kind of requests are you getting, and where are you seeing analytics going as it relates to syndicated companies like yours at Nielsen? What's different, if anything, and then bigger picture over the next 5 years, how do you see it evolving?
So I think over the past couple of years, we've seen a move from measure for me what's already happened to I want to know what's going to happen before it does, right? So I think that's a general trend you've seen in big data in particular, but just in research and in data and analytics generally. With uncertainty, like in times with COVID, we are getting asked more and more frequently by people to understand, well, what's going to happen next? So, for example, what's going to happen when, in theory, in August, we have every single major league live and we're getting ready to go into collegiate sports as well, right? So what happens to ratings? Are people going to be watching more? Are people spending more time on VOD content? To go back to Brett's point about the distribution and ability to create eyeballs in places when linear TV isn't an option for most sporting properties. So we are getting a lot of questions around that, around what to expect in the future, whether it's from a consumer behavior standpoint or from the media side. But we're also getting a lot of questions to what I think almost everyone on this panel has been talking about, which is make goods, right? So one of the things we do around valuations is understanding the value of all of your different assets, whether that's in traditional sports or esports. So understanding the potential value of assets you're being presented with. So we've been getting a lot of requests and been doing a lot of work around, so for example, for the press day, for MEAC, what is the potential value of those assets you're presenting? Whether it's the rights holders coming to us and asking us, hey, where are assets that we can use? When the MLS puts together their news signage when they're down in Orlando, to brands who are saying, hey, I'm being presented this by a college, I'm being presented this by my other partners, what's it worth? So because we have all of that syndicated data, and we've been tracking those types of assets over a long period of time, we can model out what the value of that would look like.
And that's tremendous. And then finally, building on that, Brett, in terms of doing primarily custom research, where do brand KPIs fit into all this? Because obviously, as we'll get into briefly, return on investment's a combination of the assets you get, how much you actually sell, and then what key brand measures that you move. So what would you add to this in terms of some of the trends and what you see moving forward?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting time in the world of insights and analytics. I think it's never been more needed, although I'd also been couching a lot of our clients too, is in the past you could kind of do a study and say, okay, probably things aren't going to fundamentally change in the next 6 months or 9 months. I think what we're all seeing right now is you could do a study and in a 1 month, it could be completely different than what you see. And that's not a matter of trying to push people away from insights. If anything, it's a matter of saying, we need to create a more consistent pipeline of insights and analytics so you can constantly be seeing the trends. But it's also important not to, in this time with a lot of our clients, don't make a big strategy decision off one piece of research at one piece of time. You need to kind of layer those on and on. And specifically with some of those brand KPIs in terms of generating awareness now, but the right type of awareness. I think a lot of companies and universities and brands are trying to figure that out. How do you get into this conversation in the right way? And how do you drive somebody to, with some of these advertisers, how do you drive them to purchase and come back and speak to them and connect in the appropriate manner? So like I said, really interesting time. I think there's never been more of a time where insights and analytics are needed on a more consistent basis for brands.
Yeah, so totally agree with that. Now let's open the floor to everybody. There's a lot of discussion about the model right now in college sports. CSMG happens to use primarily a revenue share model with really only a small exception in esports. And then some of the other players in the marketplace have guarantees, and they have guarantees in deals that are as long as 13 years. What are some of the techniques that can be used? And, I know we're very deep into valuation and getting a bunch of inbound from schools and conferences. What do you all see as how this has to evolve moving forward with all the uncertainties?
I mean, one of the things we've seen is that it's not just going to be a 2020 conversation, right? There's so much uncertainty, and given, to your point, the duration and the length of these engagements for most colleges, it's going to be an ongoing conversation. I mean, I think it would be foolishly optimistic to think that 2021 we're not going to have to deal with COVID at all. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I think that it's going to force both rights holders, so the colleges, but also the brands themselves to look at the kinds of things they're including in these deals, and the different fallbacks that they have as options when certain things can't happen.
Absolutely. Blake, is there anything you would add here? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm going to take a slant to this, and on the athlete side of things, and that's just what I get to do, be in the athlete marketing world. Right?
100%. We'll get there in depth, but certainly weigh in here.
I think there's a part where there's an emphasis right now, and when the games aren't happening, who has the attention? And I think this puts a heavy emphasis on the fact that you can have no games and the teams like are struggling to find assets, then the media outlets are struggling to find assets, but those athletes still have your attention. You want to know what they're doing, where they're going. I think this is further emphasizes the importance of the athlete in the NIL era, the student athlete themselves participating in the upside of the market and becoming an asset themselves. But also right now, the alumni of all of the schools across the country, they at least are in the short term still on the minds of those fans that are just leaning in, wanting to get more from sports, and they can't necessarily keep getting the same, from the teams or the conference or different media outlets themselves. So I just urge folks to think about those new outlets or considering the athletes themselves command attention. And from a stats side, and I can dive into it in a little bit about what the comparative metrics are when you do start to work with athletes and how those become assets. When everything is off, the attention still is on the athletes themselves. And I think that's one of the great center points of the sports business industry that is now going to be emphasized even more when the NIL changes come to college sports in 2021.
No question. And Patricia, at this level, it seems as though the athletes, to Blake's point, are going to augment the MEAC's ability to deliver quality results to brands. It seems as though, very, very engaged athletes, very engaged alums, and providing just a deeper and broader media. Would you agree with that assessment, that as NIL comes, it's going to be a fantastic opportunity looking at it from the conference level as well as with your member schools? You're
Okay.
hit it once.
Here we go. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Yes, I think to Blake's point, it is definitely about the athletes and what they are bringing to our conference, and also athletes of other conferences. One of the things that we want to make sure with them is that they still feel a part of the fabric of the conference, and that we're concerned about their welfare, and not just bringing in sponsors and other people, but the welfare of the student athlete in itself.
Absolutely. We'll circle back to the athlete in more depth when we get to the NIL section. In the longer term, again, the consumption of media by fans is changing dramatically. More streaming, less traditional cable, cord cutting, cord shaving, cord nevers, etc. At the core of much of this return on investment increasingly is this kind of content, whether it's live content, whether it's athlete content, shoulder programming, etc. David, I know you have a lot to say about this in terms of what generates true return on investment is engagement, and content is the best form of engagement. So perhaps you can kind of kick this conversation off, and then we'll go around the room.
Well, I don't think I'm actually kicking it off. I think I'm standing on Brett's shoulders and Blake's shoulders and Patricia's shoulders, because when you put together the ideas the three of them have just stated, so Brett with finding the right type of awareness, driving consumer behavior, then Blake bringing in the athletes, and Patricia talking about helping student athletes to feel a part of something bigger than themselves. It's exactly what you were saying, Ray, that it's content, creating engaging content that drives people to behave. So, one of the things I think Brett was mentioning was, games, and Blake with the athletes. Are there ways in which we can use existing content but repackage it? Have coaches or athletes doing something new with some of this content, or even going outside, doing interviews with people. Today, I think the challenge that athletic programs and teams face is creating new content. We already know what happened in past games and past broadcasts. We need to find new engaging content. And so we have to think about a little bit outside of the box. So I think just in terms of getting this return on the investment, it's creating this new and engaging content that's then going to drive awareness, drive consumers.
Yeah.
I think that's what we really need to be focusing on.
Awesome.
I was just going to jump in and build off that, David. I think
Please.
part of what you're saying, and also building off of Blake, it's narrative, right? Like, so much of the narrative of what we talk about in sports is who's the underdog, what's happening in the season. It's through the linear broadcast, you are building a longer term narrative and story that people buy into, that keep them coming back week after week. And in the absence of that, what is the narrative, right? So there's a lot of things that, whether it's a collegiate division that can talk about what they're doing to keep their players safe and how they're supporting the communities in which they operate. If it's an athlete, talking about what they're doing to stay fit and how their brand sponsors and endorsements are helping with that. I mean, there's no shortage of narrative right now that brands, rights holders, athletes can be talking about. It's just making sure that they're doing it and doing it in a productive way, in a way that's interesting to consumers. Whether it's about, the current state of the pandemic, whether it's through the Black Lives Matter movement, whether it's about what they're doing and about Pride Month and the LGBT community and how they're advocating for communities that they care about. There's lots of different ways to do that, and ways that are compelling and very top of mind for a lot of people right now.
Absolutely. How do brands measure the impact, though? How do brands take this? How do they use some of the tools that you all have and that we have at Collegiate Sports Management Group? What is the best way for a brand to address this? Because according to both a McKinsey study and then some great work done by the MASB, who I'm fortunate enough to be working with on an NIL project and some other sponsorship-related measurement initiatives, more than half the brands don't have a system in place to measure their sponsorships. What advice would you give them in terms of how to do that? And it goes beyond valuation. So I'll just open the floor. Matt?
When I step into a room with a client, the first thing I tell them before they need to even start talking about measurement is, why are you doing this in the first place? Right? Like that will determine what you measure. So if you're doing this because you're, call it Mountain Dew, and you're trying to increase your brand perception among a certain age bracket, that's going to have a very different measurement platform than someone who's saying, well, this is just part of my media buy, and it's, I get to use the likeness when I do my commercials. That's a very different way. So if we're talking about, as it specifically relates to topics of the day around COVID, around Black Lives Matter, around what they're doing to help their communities, that is all perception. And that needs to be driven by survey-based research. There's certain types of social analytics that you can do that we offer around the sentiment and the engagement that you're getting from communities. But you have to get the voice of the consumer in that as well. It can't just be valuation.
No question.
To what Matt was saying, I'm finding that more and more of the partners, and we call them corporate partners, that reach out to the MEAC are looking for that community engagement. Not necessarily, to sell their product, which I'm sure that's the end result, but they want the community to know that they care about the community and what's going on in society. So like Matt said, the first thing when you go, when they come to the table, we want to know if we both are feeling the same thing and we both have the best interest of the community, because when people know you care, they want to do business with you.
Yeah, to add to that, I would say you need multiple techniques to really value how that's coming to life, because you need the financial pieces. I know CSMG has a technique which pulls a lot of those pieces together. Is you need the immediate financial pieces so you can prove there is value to this. But with any brand, with anything other than a direct digital buy that you can track attribution to, there's always going to be that leap of, is there that value that I thought there would be? And that way, when you bring as much attribution as you can, and then you look at some of the brand KPIs, and, to Matt's point of understanding the objective, if you're driving awareness, understanding, okay, how many eyeballs you got on there. If you're passing out a coupon with part of your sponsorship, is it great? How much trial did we generate from that. So understanding what part of the funnel you're really trying to measure. But I think to Patricia's point too, every brand, everybody's trying to get a part of every movement right now. And it's like, you almost have to jump on it, or people don't think you care, or you've lost your opportunity. But I think people need to take a step back, and is that consumers are smart. They realize that some companies are checking the box and say, perfect, I did what I needed to do, and I put a note out there, and now I'll move on to the next thing. And they know the other brands and companies that truly believe it and is a part of their kind of soul as a brand. And those are the brands that consumers are going to come back to, believe in, kind of have loyalty to. And so I think as you talk about sponsorships and integrating that brand in the university or schools, it's when you find that kind of, when you find that pair, when you find that match there, that's how you can also show kind of your genuine nature you are to, students, to consumers, anybody else who's out there.
And Blake, you're quite an expert in social measurement. You always hear things like, well, nobody got fired for buying more ESPN or buying an NFL or NBA sponsorship or doing a deal with the Big Ten. Don't all these analytics, when you deliver them properly and you really dig in as a property or as a rights holder, et cetera, isn't that really that kind of the defense that more niche properties have in terms of demonstrating value? Because no one ever asks for a valuation of the Big Ten. It just seems like you're going to ask for valuations of mid-major conferences, D2s, D3s, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's a part when you look at the social media side, because it is digital in nature. Everyone on this call is counting likes. They're looking at comments. You got your own social channels. So that feeling when you post something, the reward you get when you get a like or two or a comment here or there. So that it's something that is very familiar to the buyers and the sellers in terms of putting a value but sometimes it's not the quantity of likes on your Facebook post, guys. I'm thinking about your personal life. It's who liked it. And that matters. It matters to all of us on this call. And so that's a really interesting thing. If you take that approach and you communicate that back to a sponsor, and it's like, this isn't the quantity, it is the quality. Like, who are we trying to reach here? How do we reach into these buckets of fans and capture the right people's attention to drive them to take action or to be more aware of your product, or just the simple affiliation with the certain account or certain team, league, and whatnot. Now, I'm just going to share some stats with you, and I'll go through them rather quickly. But we looked at on Instagram in 2019, every piece of branded content. So this is anything labeled as branded content on Instagram, from nearly 5,000 athletes to 2,500 influencers, 15,000 sports teams, 5,000 different sports league accounts and posts, and then about 8,000 posts from different media outlets. The engagement rate on a media channel was 0.7%. On league channels was 1%. So you're better off working with the league. And then on sports team channels, 1.2%. So 20% higher when you're pushing through a social channel of a team versus a league. Influencers, so just people talking about brands, 1.8%. And then athletes, 3.9%. Right? So it's just when you are able to take the time to select the channel and align, you're looking at a much higher engaged audience. It's just similar to how athletes are disparate and they're all over the place. They're hard to get access to. Same thing with some of these niche properties or the smaller properties in college sports. They have a highly passionate, engaged audience. They're just hard to get a hold of or how to navigate. And that's why CSMG exists, right? Is to take those stories and really shine a light and say, if you can find a passionate audience set, you have a more engaged outcome. And the quality of the connection you make through these types of outlets is going to be more valuable than just buying ESPN or buying a bigger asset. It's just about access.
No, that's a great point. So with that in mind, got to give Patricia a little plug here. Patricia's done incredible work with the entire MEAC conference, building out under the most challenging of circumstances, an amazing 50th anniversary program celebrating the MEAC. What advice would the other panelists have in terms of really optimizing this, in terms of measuring the dramatic impact that this could have, and looking at the importance of some of the legendary athletes that came out of the MEAC, Tariq Cohen and others, and going way back 50 years. What advice would you all have as panelists? Whether it's David from a content standpoint, Blake from a social media standpoint, Brett insights, Matthew measurement, Matthew what you're hearing from brands directly as they tell you what they want to see. Let's open the floor and give Patricia some great insights here for this amazing 50th anniversary season.
If I were to kind of take a shot at this question first, I think there are probably so many stories that Blake was talking about earlier that we don't know about the athletes, the people who've been involved in the MEAC, in its success. There's so many stories out there that people don't know that they would love to know about, that they may connect with, that may drive that 3.9% of engagement on Instagram with these athletes. So from my perspective, from a lot of the research that I do, it's telling those stories that people don't know. I got my PhD at Florida State. I don't mean to take anything away from the MEAC, but everyone knows what Deion Sanders did. You know, there are well-known stories about a lot of these people, but there are so many other great stories of great people, you know, men and women from all sorts of backgrounds. And many of these stories don't get told. So in a 50th celebration, I would think find those great touching stories and tell those stories. Let people know this is who the MEAC is. That would be my 2 cents.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Congrats, Patricia.
Thank you.
And building off of that, like I love the idea of an unsung hero, and giving the platform to someone who typically isn't celebrated in a usual day. There's a really great example. The New England Patriots had a really well done branded content series on social that focused on what happens before a game. Like what is the team that runs the concessions? What does their morning look like? What about the people that make sure the balls are inflated or maybe not? So like it looks at all those people who are just as important to the experience of a fan as the players. And I think a lot of times, and particularly now when gameplay isn't happening, those are the folks who have stories that you can tell. The people who are still working at the college, still working diligently to make sure that the players are staying in shape and staying on top of their learning, even though it's distanced. You know, there's so many different people that lead to the success of an organization, not just the athletes, and their assets that you have as well. And I think just with the platforms that brands are looking for and the way that they're looking to be representing all voices, that presents a great opportunity for everybody involved.
Brett, what are some of the brand questions that you would ask? And then please also weigh in as you were going to, but also what are some of the questions brands would ask in terms of, Patricia, sounds great, want to do it. What are brands asking about these days, whether in measuring whether it will have been viewed as effective 12 months from now?
Yeah, they just want to know whether, you know, how long are you going to be doing this for? You know, is this a one-shot deal and you moving on to the next campaign? Am I going to be, you know, how integrated is this going to be? Is this going to be just on 1 or 2 social channels and you'll kind of continue with other messaging on other areas? And so that's what I was going to jump in to do. And I think there was a question that got put in the chat too about how do you build this to scale? To me, the best way to bring that to life is own what you're going to do. So to use some of these examples, if you're going to tell some of those, you know, amazing stories about the men and women athletes, or you're going to, you know, tell the stories as Matthew was talking about in terms of the unsung heroes, don't just tell the story, create that content, bring that to life, integrate them into something going forward with the MEAC conference. Doesn't always have to be a prize, but give them some sort of honor or opportunity when people do get back to the fields, that they get some sort of opportunity that maybe someone wouldn't. Because I think where brands want to see is, okay, I'm going to get eyeballs, but will it matter? And I think those are great examples that David gave of ways to really connect. And then I would say to really make the impact both for the conference and for the brands, bring that to life across every channel you have access to, because that's going to make it powerful to the consumer. And that's what's going to really give the impact to the brands, both when they look at awareness and they look at, familiarity with the brand, as well as just people going out there and trying it and being a part of something, kind of sharing that equity that you're building through your 50th anniversary.
So let's evolve that to the conversation of like a return on investment model. The way we've always looked at it at CSMG is it really comes down to, first, what did we sell? Did we sell our service? Did we sell our product? Obviously a lot easier when you're not going through distribution channels, when you're direct to consumer, financial services, et cetera. Secondly, what is the movement in brand KPIs? And again, this is an area where Brett has some great leadership and insight. And we've intentionally put together a panel which covers all of this. And then the third one is the valuation that we do so diligently, factoring in geo targeting, factoring in audiences, factoring in engagement, and we're very statistically oriented at CSMG. So those are really the three overall areas, whether it's measuring on-screen exposure or other media and sponsorship assets. So with that in mind, I'd like to just open the floor and let's kind of talk about, from an on-screen standpoint, we're getting very automated with some IBM Watson software that one of our fantastic employees figuring out how to interface with. Beyond that, that's sort of the easy part of valuation. That's the easy part of ROI. Let's dig in a little bit deeper into the model. Maybe let's start more broadly with Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to what's your goal, right? So my biggest struggle sometimes is with brands or organizations that think just because there's data there that's a good thing. The important thing is finding the right data that's going to tell you the truth. So if your goal is sales, there are ways of measuring sales impact based on exposure. We can input all of our exposure data into marketing mix, regardless of what vendor you use. Like there's no shortage of new ways to do data. And you brought up geo targeting. Well, that's great for someone if you're a car dealership or something like that, or your QSR. But if I'm Kellogg's, doesn't do me a whole lot of good because there's no Kellogg's store. So again, it goes back to what your objective is and making sure that you're aligning that measurement to the objective. And in terms of the valuation piece and measuring what's on screen, I always look at, and we always advise our clients, whether it's in collegiate sports, professional sports, esports, that the valuation has to go hand in hand with your brand lift metrics. Because yes, it's great that you got exposure, but did anybody notice or care, right? Mm-hmm. So like, we can measure your logo 6 ways to Sunday, whether it's dynamically inserted, whether it's on a physical asset, but is it doing what you need it to do? Like showing up is just half the game. So it's then what are you doing with that asset and with that real estate to drive what you need to happen with consumers?
And then Brett, how would you tie in like brands depending on where they are in the food chain? For example, a dominant brand like Toyota or a challenger brand like Mitsubishi in the car area. How does that change when you're looking at sponsorships in terms of brand KPIs?
Sure. I mean, for someone like Toyota, a lot of times, it's great to get their name out there, but at the end of the day, when you have awareness at the levels they do, that's not necessarily a priority. Sometimes they're spending the money to protect the ground, because if they don't, their competitor will. And so sometimes they're investing that money to say, okay, we want to own it. We're going to get some value. They probably don't necessarily have great metrics, but they'll be able to drive enough, and they have enough money to spend that. I think challenger brands, it's a great opportunity to really get your name out there and drive interest. I would say on a measurement standpoint, the thing I would really encourage folks to think about is time. Because at any type of brand investment, you want some immediacy so you don't get your budget cut, but you have to give enough runway that if a consumer sees, maybe if they see something for Coke, they're going to go and say, you know what, I saw that, maybe not consciously, I'm going to go buy a Coke. But if they see Toyota out, they see other car brand, like just because you saw an advertisement or a sponsorship for it, doesn't mean you're going to go spend, thousands of dollars on a car immediately just because you said, oh, I saw that, that's interesting. And so purchase and that impact takes time. And so setting up the models, even from a brand standpoint, to understand what's that tail look like? How long does it generally take for that impact? How do you stay top of mind for consumers when they hit that point of purchase? I think are really important.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
we even see that across all of our data to show that, like, particularly with the bigger sports properties, the first year is usually below where you'll end up, say, by year 4. And knowing that a lot of these deals that happen with either conferences or with specific teams, specifically around things like naming rights, you look at like the college bowls, it takes a while, particularly if you're taking over a property that was prior owned by somebody else, right? Like, it takes a while to build up equity. And I think it goes to the point that we've been talking about throughout the panel, which is consistency, which is, I don't just show up during college playoffs and I won't hear from you until like next December, right? Like that, it doesn't work. So it's that consistency of messaging. It's to the point of like, if you're building out an unsung hero narrative, is that something you're just doing because it's opportunistic and you need an asset to sell? Or is this truly part of your ethos and your platform? And consumers are way too smart to be able to, and they'll sniff that out instantly.
So Matt, building on that, you just took over the whole esports operation at Nielsen, which is really going to be massive. We got a couple of questions on the chat. How does this differ between traditional sports and esports, which, as we're seeing, can live in a virtual environment a lot more seamlessly, a lot more organically than traditional sports? So tell us what you're doing in terms of measurement and analytics there.
Yeah, and thanks, Thomas, for the question. So I think that the major difference that we see, just like in a pure tactical sense, between esports and traditional sports, and you brought it up earlier, media habits are changing. The reason why esports is so appealing to so many brands is that it's very young by comparison. Like the median age is at least 2 decades lower than what you would see across typical sports. And it's a very digital consumer. Half of esports fans don't have a cable package. And among those, and another half has ad blockers, right? So sponsorship is really the key way to reach those people. So it's very different in terms of what you have to put together to activate, because especially right now when some of the big esports leagues were moving towards in-person events and they were actually going to have physical signage, they don't have that anymore. They've got their team playing from a basement somewhere or from their practice facility. So it's very different in that sense. But measurement is still the same, right? It doesn't matter if I'm watching it on a computer screen or on my TV screen. It's still a visible linear asset, so to speak. I think what becomes different is, again, going back to why are you doing this? You don't go into esports for reach. Like, that's just, if you think you're going into esports to reach a bunch of people, we should have a separate talk that involves a couch and probably a third party. But so you're going for a more focused audience that's gonna work harder for you on like a CPM basis. So then it becomes, all right, well, what are you trying to get those people to do? Am I that upstart brand that's just wants people to know who I am? And that I think that the beginning of that consumer adoption curve is an esports player, and I need to get them on board fast so then it echoes to the rest of the market.
I want to jump in here. Ray. This is something just for everyone that's listening in. There's that moment, like, I want to advertise, I want to do a sponsorship in esports just to know what metrics I get back, right? I mean, I don't even know where it starts. And one of those things that anyone that's ever sold a sponsorship, and you're talking about those challenger brands, maybe it's their first time buying esports, their first time doing any sponsorship at all, right? I think everyone on this call agrees that sports sponsorship works. Like, our entire livelihood is most likely built on it somehow, right? So no one's going to disagree with that concept. But when it's that first time lean in, like most of the time when people come to us, it's their first time they've ever paid an athlete to tweet something. And they get the results back and they're like, is this good? And so we spend a lot of time, and you have to have something relative to show them, right? And that's one of those things that there's a great benefit of the folks on this call, and you talk about CSMG, that they have years worth of data to give you a sense of like, is this good or not? Like, how can we improve this or whatnot? And that's really important for the first time buyer, because you can dump a data bucket on top of them and they'd be swimming and they don't even know what it means. But just taking that same data, I'll give you an example. There's a quick serve restaurant that did an activation. They paid one guy $150 to send out one tweet, right? And he got 15,000 engagements on it. Now they wanted to just test the waters. So engagement was the metric they cared about. And they got the stats back and we were giddy as heck. And they're like, is this good? I'm like, is this good? We had a quick serve restaurant on the national level, paid a Super Bowl MVP the week prior, $15,000 and generated 7,000 engagements. So they had generated double the amount of engagements on 1/100th of the spend. And they could have just gotten that data report and said, I don't know if that worked. But instead they got to go into their boss's office and say, we outperformed blank king, right? You know, whatever, fill in the blank with whatever quick serve restaurant. But we outperformed one of the biggest brands on the planet because we were smart about it. And guess what? They come back. They keep coming back. So I just wanted to say, like, when you're spending on esports, you're spending it, the results need to at least some relative, they need to be compared to something. And all of us on this call can at least give some comparison and give confidence to the sponsors that are ultimately putting their faith in us to help put their dollars in the right place to reach the right audience.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that brands are asking us all the time, right? So we work with tons of, and I oversee the brands vertical for Nielsen Sports. So, you know, every day I'm talking to big brands that are working with teams, leagues, governing bodies, et cetera. And for the ones that are just getting into esports, to that point, like, they know they're going to be spending less on esports rights. They're not going to be, it's not going to be anywhere near the fees that they're going to pay to someone like the NBA or the NFL. Or honestly, even to someone like a MEAC. It's, you know, esports is just smaller. You're reaching less people. But what they want to know is my ROI better, right? Like, does my $100,000 in esports take me 3 times as far as my $1 million in traditional sports? And so that's where, you know, we've been very diligent and intentional about making sure everything we do in esports is to the same methodology as sports. And that's one of the great things that, Blake, you guys have working in your favor on social, is that it's, you know, it doesn't matter who's putting out the content, the metrics are all the same.
You know, which is exceptionally powerful. And Patricia, the MEAC is, you know, well inside the first 10 D1 conferences to get into esports. And I'm sure you know, the visionary commissioner, you have Dr. Thomas, and yourself, as you dig into this, measuring is going to be very, very important. Talk a little bit about why you got into esports, and I guess it was sponsor driven, from what I could understand, that one of the sponsors said, I'm all in if you guys can deliver something in esports, and you guys responded real quickly.
Right. That's one of those days you wake up and it's a good day because they're calling you and you're not calling them. But yeah, we did receive a call from a sponsor that actually brought another sponsor on during our basketball tournament. And so when he started talking about that, I reached out to the commissioner about esports, and he had told me that we had signed an agreement with a company, and that company is Blaze Fire. And ever since that day, we have been working on our media press release, which went out last week to introduce them and connect the two organizations. And the next press release coming out is going to be the one where people can start signing up in the league, as well as finding out what games will be a part of our league. So it's mind-boggling to me. Now I'm probably older than most of you on here, and so I'm not a gamer. So it's actually learning, you know, all of that and trying to figure out why is this so hyped. But I understand because of the circumstances and the condition of our country right now, this is gonna be the new normal. This is gonna be the new normal. And if you don't get on board, then the train is going to leave you. And so we do not intend to be left behind.
David, if you could just add in high-level measurement, what you're seeing. You've been a practitioner, you're a professor, you're running an entire program. What do you see as some of the key measurement opportunities and analytics opportunities and key issues around esports? And then we'll go to Blake real quick after that on NIL, and then maybe have some concluding comments.
Yeah, I mean, there are about 10 things I would love to talk about right now. I'm going to try to answer your question first and see if I can work in a couple of these other things. So when it comes to the measurement side, I think what the comment Patricia just made is that there are many people who don't know much about esports. You know, I often, when I talk to people I work with, I talk about it as the South Parkification, because there's a really well-known episode of South Park that's all about esports. And it is just filled with generalizations that I think a lot of people connect with, that they're, you know, loners in their basement eating, you know, certain foods and drinks and things like that. And so when it comes to measurement and how do we try to measure, you know, are people engaging with us? Well, people don't know a lot about esports. CSMG is working with the ECAC, and they've got 8 different games that they're intending to offer. Okay, so that's literally 8 different games that students can play. A lot of the students, they know these games, but for the rest of us, you know, what's the difference between Valorant, Call of Duty, and Counter-Strike? These are all they can be 5v5 first-person shooter games. What's the difference between them? Which one should I watch? You know, even if I'm a 12-year-old girl, I'm interested in these games. Which one should I try first? And so there's a lot of knowledge and awareness that kind of underpins what we might want to measure. And so one of the first things I would say would be, we need to do education. We need to help people understand esports better. And, you know, the question that I think Thomas was asking, you know, we talk about in traditional sports endorsers, although in esports we talk about influencers. And there, you know, we could parcel these things out and kind of figure out the differences. But there's still a lot of the points that people have made. Authenticity. This is something that's really important. I would argue to the example Blake gave. If you are more authentic, if you can find someone who has a more authentic connection with a sponsor or a conference or something like that, that you would be able to measure a better connection between the audience that they were promoting to. If you're able to do something more with a narrative that Matthew was talking about earlier, you know, if you're able to tell a story, I think there's a lot of really interesting things that you can kind of bring together there and then try to measure at different points. Okay, you did something. What was the result? You did something else. What was the result? Are we then moving people towards that eventual consumer behavior, whatever that goal is that we're working towards? So I'm sorry it's not a perfect answer to your question, Ray, about measurement, but more like a philosophy behind how you would go through thinking about how you would do this.
Well, absolutely. It's definitely coming. It's definitely crucial. You talked about influencers and the power of influencers. This is where NIL is, name, image, and likeness. This is an area where we're looking forward to collaborating a bunch with Blake and others, as Open Doors has such incredible products, relationships, analytics, etc., which will augment what we do perfectly, and will also support what we do for schools, helping them with enrollment challenges now and really turning into media brands. But let's just stick to the final point on NIL. Blake, what do you see coming? How is this going to be measured? How is this going to augment what brands do with properties, with rights holders, et cetera?
Yeah, to talk about NIL, I'll take you back about 7 years ago when we had just started Open Doors. We got a phone call from the NFL Players Association, who brought us out to DC, sat down and said, we believe that social media will have the biggest impact on the NIL value of NFL players over the next decade and beyond. And right now, our players don't know what they're worth. They don't know how to increase their value. And once a deal comes to the table, there's no easy way to help them get it done. Can you help us? And you know, we walked through that scenario and built out a technology and solution for them. And now we help the MLBPA, NBPA, NHL, PGA Tour, LPGA. And so we've seen what happens at the next level when it comes to athletes monetizing their NIL through social and digital media. And it is a large and growing part of the dollars that are coming to pro athletes. the conversation around NIL and student athletes in the national media is heavily centered on traditional endorsements. Everyone's worried about the shoe deal or the car dealership appearance. And that is the 1% of 1% of dollars that will flow through traditional methods. NIL revenue for student athletes will be heavily centered on social media, streaming on Twitch, monetizing YouTube channels, posting on Instagram stories, even Snapchat takeovers. That is the way in which these student athletes are going to monetize NIL at scale across 600,000 plus college athletes, you know, from the NCAA to NAIA to NJCAA. I mean, everyone across the whole board. So how do schools live in this world? We're seeing, we're partners with half of the Power 5, Group of 5 schools. They use our technology on a daily basis to help their student athletes understand their value and give them access to photos and videos to increase their value. They can't monetize it today. But we're seeing more and more schools say, we are going to lean in and help our student athletes increase their marketing value, because this will be one of the greatest recruiting tools to our school, and a great way to differentiate ourselves from others is that if we are providing the resources, just like a great weight room sometimes can sway you. Guys, I went to Nebraska. They had the coolest facilities, like the best, you know, they had the best of everything. And that mattered to me. This next generation of student athletes will care about NIL. So the way that schools are setting up success for student athletes to increase their marketing value so that they can deliver a better return to sponsors once they ultimately get that phone call, those schools are going to be ahead in the recruiting game. And then once the market turns on, you're more likely to see sponsors activating athletes through passive social digital media activations than really seeing athletes flooding the local car dealership or hospital for paid appearances or speaking gigs. Like, it is mostly going to be the exact way that students today monetize their NIL, not student athletes, but students. And it's through setting up creative online social channels, becoming an entrepreneur themselves, and making money through NIL while they sleep.
Absolutely. It's certainly an exciting time for them. Any other closing comments that anyone on the panel would like to make as it relates to measurement, the future of measurement? One of my favorite movies of all time is Back to School, where Professor Bombay says there's only two kinds of businesses, the quick and the dead. And certainly this seems to be a time where businesses have to be quick, they have to measure, they have to be agile with investment. Anybody would like to close after that humorous or not so humorous insight and perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, and I think this lines up nicely to everything we've talked about today, is just whatever you're doing, do it with intention, right? Like, don't just be reactive for being reactive's sake. Know what your long-term goals are and how your reaction to current circumstances leads to that, right? So whether it's, why am I in this investment, to then inform what should I measure, to, Patricia said, yes, they had a sponsor who came forward and wanted esports, but I guarantee you that was a very thoughtful conversation that they had internally about, all right, we're not just going to do it for this one sponsor. This could be a long, sustainable business for us, and something that provides value to the university, to the students, to our potential business partners. Things need to be done with intention and with purpose, and not just, oh, I got to go do this. I got to go measure this. I've got to go start doing this thing. So that would be, there's one thing you keep from today, I would say, do what you do with intention.
Just one last thing to add to that, I would just say, tying to that, is build your brand. Whether we like it or not, everything's a brand. You yourself, you're building your own brand. The university is building their brand. A league is building their brand. Athletes have their brand. So it all comes into balancing what you need in the short term, what you need to benefit from, what you're trying to build over the long term, what your objectives are, and where you're trying to lead to. So, similar to what Matt just said, keeping in mind what your intention is and keeping that in mind over the long term, because, you want to make the right steps and get to where you want to go. So keep that in mind as well.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everyone's time. Thanks to the audience for sticking with us. 2 weeks, we have one on women in sports, some tremendous folks that we'll be speaking with beyond college sports even, and some of the challenges, opportunities, etc. And any further questions about any of the analytic tools or skills that we have at CSMG, or any of the fine companies that our panelists abroad or any brands that want to participate in the 50th anniversary, please reach out to us. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's time. Stay well and stay safe.